The girl who would become known only as Ghost was born in a small fishing village on the coast of what used to be called Norway. Her mother was a schoolteacher. Her father fixed boats for a living. She had a name back then, a beautiful name that her grandmother had chosen from an old family book. That name would later be erased from every database, every record, every memory bank that humanity controlled. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. When she was 7 years old, the Keth arrived. They came not with fire and destruction, as the old movies had predicted. They came with silence. One morning, the sky simply changed color. It went from blue to a deep purple that hurt the eyes if you looked at it too long. Ships descended from clouds that had turned the color of bruises. These ships were beautiful in a terrible way. They looked like they had been grown rather than built, with surfaces that seemed to breathe and pulse with a light that came from somewhere deep inside. The Keth themselves were tall and thin, with too many joints in their limbs. Their faces had no features that humans could read. No expressions. No emotions that we could understand. They spoke through devices that translated their clicking language into flat, emotionless words. "You will serve," they said. "Or you will be removed." Earth's governments tried to fight. It lasted 3 weeks. The Keth did not use weapons as humans understood them. They used something that made electronics stop working. They used something that made soldiers forget why they were holding guns. They used something that made entire cities simply stop, frozen in place like photographs. By the time the girl was 8, the occupation had begun in full. The Keth did not want to kill all humans. That was the strange thing. They needed workers. They needed hands that could reach into small spaces their long fingers could not fit. They needed minds that could think in ways their own minds could not. They were building something on Earth. Something enormous. Something that stretched across 3 continents and reached up into the clouds where human eyes could not see. The girl's parents were taken to work on this project when she was 9. She never saw them again. She was placed in what the Keth called a development center. Human children called it something else. They called it the cage. In the cage, children were tested. They were measured. Their blood was taken and studied. Their brains were scanned by machines that made their heads feel like they were full of angry bees. The Keth were looking for something. They never told the children what it was. Most children failed whatever test the Keth were running. These children were sent to labor camps where they would work until they were used up. Some children passed one test but failed another. These children disappeared into different sections of the development center, never to be seen again. The girl passed every test. She did not know what this meant. She did not know that her brain worked differently than other human brains. She did not know that when the Keth scanned her mind, they saw patterns that made them click to each other in what might have been excitement or fear. She only knew that she was moved to a special section of the center where she was the only human child. Here, she was trained. The Keth taught her their language. Not the clicking sounds they made with their mouth parts, but the deeper language underneath. The language of mathematics that described how their technology worked. The language of command that made their machines obey. They plugged wires into her skull and poured information directly into her brain until she screamed and begged them to stop. They never stopped. By the time she was 12, she could interface with Keth technology as easily as a Keth could. By the time she was 13, she could do it better than most of them. By the time she was 14, the Keth realized they had made a terrible mistake. The girl had learned their systems too well. She had learned their weaknesses. She had learned the codes that controlled their ships, their weapons, their communication networks. And she had learned something else. She had learned that the Keth were afraid. They were afraid of something called the silence. It was coming from the deep reaches of space, from the darkness between galaxies. It consumed everything it touched. The Keth had been running from it for 10,000 years. They were building their enormous project on Earth because they needed to escape, to jump to another galaxy before the silence arrived. They did not care what happened to humanity after they left. On the night she turned 15, the girl made her choice. She used what she had learned to break into the Keth's central network. She planted a virus that would grow slowly, quietly, eating away at their systems from the inside. Then, she erased every record of herself. Every image. Every brain scan. Every genetic sample. She made herself into a ghost. She escaped the development center by walking through doors that opened for her and past guards whose weapons would not fire. She walked out into a world that had forgotten what freedom looked like. That was the night she stopped being a girl with a name and became something else entirely. The human resistance had been fighting the Keth for 7 years by then. They were losing. They had always been losing. Their weapons were old. Their technology was broken. They hid in caves and basements and the shells of burned-out buildings, planning attacks that killed a few Keth and accomplished nothing. The ghost found them 3 months after her escape. She walked into their hidden base in the mountains of what had been Switzerland and offered them something they had never had before. She offered them hope. "I know their systems," she said to the resistance leaders. "I know their weaknesses. I know how to hurt them." The leaders were suspicious. How could a 15-year-old girl know anything useful? How did she even find their secret base? Was she a trap? She answered their doubts by taking control of a Keth patrol ship that was flying overhead. She made it land in front of their base. She made its weapons systems power down. She made its crew march out with their 2 long arms raised in surrender. "I can teach you," she said. "I can teach you how to fight them." The resistance leaders stopped doubting. They gave her a call sign that night. They called her Ghost because of how she moved, how she appeared and disappeared, how the Keth systems could never find her. The name spread through the resistance networks like fire through dry grass. Within a month, every cell on the planet had heard of Ghost. Within 6 months, she was the most wanted creature on Earth. The Keth put a bounty on her. They offered rewards that would have made a human rich beyond imagination. They offered freedom, real freedom, to any human who could capture her. Some humans tried. They died. Others became ghosts themselves, disappearing into the resistance to fight alongside her. Ghost trained the first generation of what would become known as the Wraith Corps. She taught them how to interface with Keth technology using implants she designed herself. She taught them how to think like the enemy, how to predict their movements, how to strike where it hurt most. The war changed. For 7 years, the resistance had been a nuisance. A mosquito biting at the ankle of a giant. Now it became something else. Keth supply lines were disrupted. Their communication networks went dark at crucial moments. Their automated defenses turned against them without warning. Ghost led the attack on the Keth's European command center when she was 17. It was a fortress built into the side of a mountain, protected by shields that should have been impossible to breach. Ghost walked through those shields like they were not there. She walked into the heart of the command center and planted explosives in places the Keth had thought were completely secure. The explosion was visible from space. 3,000 Keth died. More importantly, the central processing node that controlled all Keth operations in Europe was destroyed. It would take them years to rebuild. Ghost became a legend. The Keth called her the aberration. They did not understand how she could do what she did. They did not understand how a human brain could interface with their technology better than their own. They studied the problem for years. They dissected every human they could find who showed any similar abilities. They found nothing useful. What they did not know was that Ghost was not special because of her genetics or her brain structure. She was special because she had survived their own training. She had absorbed everything they taught her and turned it against them. She was their creation, their weapon, pointed back at them. The war continued. Ghost moved from continent to continent, training new Wraith Corps cells, leading attacks on Keth installations, staying one step ahead of their hunters. She never stayed in one place for more than a few days. She never used the same route twice. She never trusted anyone completely. She was 19 years old when the Keth made their first attempt to kill her directly. They sent one of their elite warrior castes, a keth bred specifically for hunting and killing. It tracked her to a ruined city in what had been Eastern Europe. It came for her in the night, moving through the broken buildings like a shadow. Ghost was waiting for it. The fight lasted 17 minutes. By the end, the warrior caste was dead, its two long limbs bent at impossible angles. Ghost had 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, and a cut across her face that would leave a scar from her left eyebrow to her right cheek. She crawled out of the ruins as the sun rose. Her team found her half dead, bleeding into the rubble. They carried her to safety, patched her wounds, and waited to see if she would survive. She survived. She always survived. The scar became another part of her legend. Other resistance fighters began cutting similar marks into their own faces, a sign of loyalty to Ghost and her cause. The Keth noticed this. They began executing any human found with the mark. This only made more humans want to bear it. Ghost turned 20 in a bunker beneath the bombed-out remains of a city that had once been called Prague. Her team had found a bottle of something that might have been wine. They sang songs that humans had been singing for thousands of years. For one night, they pretended that the world was not burning around them. The next morning, Ghost began planning the attack that would change everything. The Keth had almost finished their great project. The structure that stretched across 3 continents was nearly complete. Ghost had studied it for years, piecing together its purpose from fragments of data stolen from Keth networks. She knew what it was now. It was a door. A door to another galaxy. A door that would allow the Keth to escape the silence that was coming to consume everything. They were going to abandon Earth. They were going to leave humanity behind to face the silence alone. Ghost decided that was not going to happen. She gathered the leaders of every resistance cell on the planet. They came in secret, risking their lives to meet in a hidden location deep beneath the mountains. There were 200 of them, representing millions of fighters. They looked at Ghost with eyes full of hope and fear. "We have one chance," she told them. "One chance to take our world back. One chance to show the Keth that humanity will not be abandoned. One chance to save ourselves." She laid out her plan. It was insane. It was impossible. It required perfect timing, absolute coordination, and more luck than any army had a right to expect. The resistance leaders looked at each other. Then, they looked back at Ghost, at the scar on her face, at the steel in her eyes. They agreed. The attack would happen in 3 months. 3 months to prepare. 3 months to position their forces. 3 months until humanity rose up and fought for its survival. Ghost spent those 3 months in constant motion. She visited every major cell, inspected every force, ensured every piece of the plan was in place. She slept perhaps 2 hours a night. She ate when she remembered to. She pushed herself beyond what any human body should be able to endure. Her team worried about her. They begged her to rest, to eat, to take care of herself. She ignored them. There would be time for rest after the battle. There would be time for everything after the battle. If they survived. The night before the attack, Ghost stood alone on a hilltop overlooking the ruins of what had been a great city. The stars above were dimmed by the purple haze that the Keth had spread across the sky. She remembered looking at stars when she was a child, before the invasion, before everything changed. She remembered her mother pointing out constellations. She remembered her father telling her stories about sailors who navigated by starlight. She remembered her name, the name her grandmother had chosen from an old family book. She did not say that name out loud. She had not said it in years. Ghost was who she was now. Ghost was who she needed to be. But, deep inside, in a place she never showed anyone, she remembered the girl she had been. The girl who loved the sea. The girl who wanted to be a teacher like her mother. The girl who had a name. Tomorrow, that girl would fight for the future of her species. Tomorrow, Ghost would lead humanity into its greatest battle. The stars wheeled overhead, uncaring and eternal. Ghost watched them until the first light of dawn touched the eastern sky. Then, she turned and walked back to her forces. It was time. The attack began at dawn across 7 continents simultaneously. Ghost had positioned herself at the most critical target. The central control hub of the Keth Gateway, buried deep beneath what had once been the Sahara Desert. Around her stood 50 of her best Wraith Corps soldiers, men and women who had trained for years under her guidance. They wore stolen Keth technology integrated into their nervous systems. They moved like shadows through the underground tunnels that the Keth had carved into the earth. Above ground, the battle was already raging. Resistance forces struck Keth positions from Indonesia to Brazil. They attacked power stations, communication relays, supply depots. They hit everything at once, overwhelming the Keth's ability to respond. It was not meant to win the war. It was meant to create chaos. Chaos was Ghost's weapon. The tunnels beneath the desert were dark and warm. The walls pulsed with the same organic technology that all Keth structures used. Ghost moved through them with her eyes closed, feeling the flow of data through the systems around her. She had become so attuned to Keth technology that she could sense it like a living thing. Her team followed her in perfect silence. They had practiced this mission 100 times in simulated environments. They knew every turn, every junction, every security checkpoint. They knew where the guards would be stationed and exactly how to neutralize them. The first Keth patrol appeared around a corner ahead. For warriors, tall and angular, their weapons raised. Ghost raised her hand and the wraith beside her fired 4 shots from a weapon that made no sound. 4 Keth dropped without knowing they were dead. They moved on. The control hub was deep underground, protected by layers of security that would have been impossible for normal humans to penetrate. But Ghost was not normal. She had been made by the Keth themselves, shaped by their training, transformed into something that existed between human and alien. She reached the first security barrier. It was a wall of energy that would vaporize anything that touched it. Ghost closed her eyes and reached out with her mind, touching the systems that controlled the barrier. She spoke to them in the language the Keth had taught her, the deep mathematical language that their technology understood. The barrier fell. Her team moved through. They encountered 17 more security measures on their descent. Ghost disabled each one without slowing down. The Keth had built their systems to be impenetrable to any attack. They had not considered that their greatest weapon would become their greatest weakness. At 0700 hours, Ghost's team reached the outer perimeter of the control hub. They were 300 meters beneath the surface of the Earth, surrounded by rock and Keth technology. The air tasted like copper and ozone. The hub was ahead, behind a door that was 20 meters thick and made of material that had not existed on Earth before the invasion. Ghost pressed her palm against the door and felt the security protocols activate. They scanned her, probed her, tried to identify her. They found nothing. She had erased herself too thoroughly. To the Keth systems, she did not exist. The door opened. Inside was a chamber the size of a stadium. The walls were covered with screens showing data from every Keth installation on Earth. In the center stood the main control column, a pillar of pulsing light that connected to the gateway system above. This was the brain of the entire operation. If Ghost could take control of it, she could take control of everything. There was only one problem. The Keth High Commander was waiting for her. He stood in front of the control column, flanked by 20 of his elite guards. He was taller than any Keth Ghost had ever seen, his limbs even longer, his body even more alien. When he spoke, his voice needed no translator. He had learned human speech. "We knew you would come," he said. "We have been waiting." Ghost's team spread out behind her, weapons raised. But they all knew they were outmatched. The elite guards were the deadliest warriors the Keth had ever created. 20 of them against 50 humans was no contest. "You have caused us great trouble," the High Commander continued. "You have killed many of our kind. You have delayed our great work by years. We should have destroyed you when we had the chance." Ghost did not respond. She was calculating. Measuring distances. Counting guards. looking for weaknesses. But, it is over now, the High Commander said. Your rebellion ends here. Your species will serve its purpose, and, then, it will be forgotten. The universe will never know you existed. He raised one of his two long arms. The guards stepped forward. Ghost smiled. It was the last thing the High Commander expected. This human female, surrounded by superior forces, facing certain death, was smiling. You know what the difference is between the Keth and humanity? Ghost asked. The High Commander paused. He was curious despite himself. You have technology, Ghost said. You have power. You have lived for millions of years and conquered 1,000 worlds. But, you are afraid. You run from the silence instead of fighting it. You enslave other species instead of working with them. You have forgotten what it means to be brave. She raised her hand. Her fingers danced in the air, touching controls that only she could see. Humanity is not afraid. Behind the High Commander, the control column flickered. Its light changed from blue to red. Alarms began to sound throughout the complex. What have you done? The High Commander demanded. I have been in your systems since I was 15 years old, Ghost said. Did you really think your security could keep me out? Did you really think this trap would work? The screens on the walls began changing. They showed Keth installations across the planet. They showed those installations exploding, burning, falling to pieces. The attacks were not random acts of sabotage. They were surgical strikes, coordinated to a fraction of a second, hitting the exact points that would cause the most damage. You are watching your empire fall, Ghost said. Every power station. Every communication hub. Every weapon platform. Gone. The High Commander screamed. It was a sound that no human throat could make, a sound of rage and disbelief and fear. He lunged toward Ghost, faster than any creature his size should be able to move. Ghost was faster. She did not fight him with weapons. She fought him with his own technology. She reached out with her mind and touched the implants that all Keth carried in their bodies. She spoke to them in the deep language. She told them to stop working. The High Commander froze mid-stride. His limbs locked. His eyes went dark. He stood like a statue, alive but unable to move. His guards suffered the same fate. Ghost walked past them without a glance. She reached the control column and placed both hands on its surface. Information flooded into her mind. She saw everything. The entire Keth network spread out before her like a map of stars. She saw the gateway. It was nearly complete. A few more days and the Keth would have been able to use it. They would have escaped to another galaxy, abandoning Earth to its fate. Ghost made a different choice. She accessed the gateway's controls and began to reprogram them. The gateway was designed to take the Keth to safety. Ghost was going to make it do something else entirely. It took her 17 minutes. 17 minutes during which her team held the chamber, fighting off reinforcements that arrived too late to stop her. 17 minutes during which the battle raged across 7 continents. 17 minutes during which humanity's fate was decided by a girl with no name. When she was done, she stepped back from the control column. What did you do? Asked one of her Wraith soldiers, a young woman who had been with Ghost since the early days. I changed the destination, Ghost said. On the screens, the gateway activated. It was not supposed to activate yet. The Keth commanders across the planet watched in horror as their great project came online without their command. The gateway opened not to another galaxy, but to somewhere much closer. Ghost had aimed it at the Keth homeworld. Not to travel there, but to do something else. She had turned it into a transmitter. The Keth had been running from the silence for 10,000 years. They had hidden their trail, covered their tracks, made sure the silence could not follow them. Ghost had just broadcast the location of their homeworld across the entire universe. The silence would know where to find them now. It was not a weapon. It was not a bomb. It was worse. It was a death sentence for the entire Keth species. The High Commander found his voice. He was still frozen, still trapped in his own body, but his mouth could move. "You have doomed us," he whispered. "Yes," Ghost said. "Just as you would have doomed us." She turned and walked toward the exit. Her team followed. Behind them, the High Commander and his guards stood like statues, watching their empire crumble around them. The battle continued for 3 more days. Without their central command, without their communication networks, without their leaders, the Keth fell apart. Human forces struck again and again, hitting them while they were confused and disorganized. By the end of the 3rd day, the Keth were beaten. Not destroyed, not completely, but beaten badly enough that they could no longer hold the planet. Their remaining forces gathered at the gateway, desperate to escape before the silence found them. Ghost let them go. Some of her commanders argued. They wanted to destroy the remaining Keth, to make sure they could never threaten Earth again. Ghost refused. "We are not them," she said. "We do not exterminate entire species because we are afraid. Let them run. Let them try to hide from what is coming. We have won our world back. That is enough." The last Keth ships fled Earth on the 4th day after the battle began. They passed through the gateway and vanished into the void between galaxies. The gateway shut down behind them, its purpose fulfilled. Earth was free. The celebrations lasted for weeks. In every city, every town, every village that had survived the occupation, humans came out into the streets and celebrated their liberation. They sang songs and lit fires and wept tears of joy. After 12 years of slavery, they were free. Ghost did not celebrate. She disappeared the day after the last Keth ship fled. One moment she was there, standing in the command center of the Resistance headquarters. The next moment she was gone, slipped away without a word to anyone. Her team searched for her. Every Resistance cell on the planet looked for her. They found nothing. Ghost had lived up to her name one final time. The war was won, but the work was just beginning. Earth was devastated. Cities lay in ruins. Billions had died during the occupation. The infrastructure that had kept civilization running was shattered. Rebuilding would take generations. But humans had always been good at rebuilding. The new governments that formed after the liberation looked for Ghost. They wanted to make her their leader, their symbol, their hero. She had saved humanity. She should be the one to guide them into the future. She never answered their calls. Instead, something else began to happen. In the war zones of the world, where reconstruction was slowest and danger was highest, people began to see a figure. A woman with a scar across her face, wearing the simple clothes of a common worker. She appeared in places where there was fighting, where bandits threatened refugees, where warlords tried to carve out new empires from the chaos. She never gave her name. She never stayed long. She just appeared, dealt with whatever problem existed, and disappeared again. The people she helped began to call her by the only name they knew. Ghost. The call sign spread from continent to continent. It became a word that meant hope, that meant justice, that meant someone was watching. When powerful men thought about exploiting the weak, they had to wonder if Ghost was watching. When criminals planned to prey on refugees, they had to ask themselves if Ghost would appear. She could not be everywhere. She was only one person. But the fear of her was everywhere. The hope of her was everywhere. 5 years after liberation, the Earth was recovering. New cities rose from the ruins of the old. New technologies emerged from the study of Keth systems that had been left behind. Humanity was rebuilding itself stronger than before. Ghost was still out there. Sightings came in from every corner of the globe. A woman fitting her description had stopped a militia attack in Central Africa. Someone who moved like her had protected a refugee camp in Southeast Asia. A figure with a scarred face had taken down a criminal organization in South America. She was becoming a myth. A legend. A story that people told each other in dark times. But she was also still just a woman. A woman who had never known peace. A woman who had been fighting since she was a child. A woman who did not know how to stop. In a world that was finally healing, Ghost could not heal. She did not know how. She only knew how to fight. And there was always someone who needed fighting. The Wraith Corps had officially disbanded after the liberation. Their purpose had been fulfilled. Many of them tried to return to normal lives, to find families, to build homes. Some succeeded. Some did not. A few of them stayed in contact with each other. They passed information through hidden channels, tracked threats to the new peace, kept watch over a world that was still fragile. And, when things got bad enough, they reached out to Ghost. She always answered. 10 years after liberation, the first message came from beyond the solar system. It was not from the Keth. It was from someone else. Something else. A species that had detected humanity's emergence from occupation. A species that wanted to make contact. They called themselves the Collective. They were older than the Keth. They had watched the Earth's liberation from afar. They had seen what humanity had done, how they had fought against impossible odds, how they had refused to submit. They were impressed. The Collective sent an ambassador to Earth. It arrived in a ship that looked like a crystal cathedral, beautiful and strange. The ambassador itself was a being of pure light, communicating through patterns and colors that human scientists had to learn to interpret. It had a message for humanity. The silence is coming, the ambassador said. It will reach this part of the galaxy in approximately 200 years. You have that long to prepare. The governments of Earth panicked. They had thought they were safe. They had thought the silence was the Keth's problem, not theirs. Is there a way to fight it? They asked. Unknown, the ambassador said. No species has ever survived direct contact with the silence. But we have theories. Possibilities. Plans. Then, help us, they said. Tell us what to do. The ambassador's light shifted into patterns that humans had learned to interpret as something like amusement. We will help you, it said. But, we have one condition. We wish to speak with the one you call Ghost. She is the reason we are here. She did something that has never been done before. She defeated the Keth not through superior force, but through understanding them. We believe she may be the key to surviving what is to come. The governments of Earth did not know where Ghost was. They put out calls across every communication channel. They asked every former resistance fighter. They searched every corner of the planet. Ghost heard the calls. She had always heard everything. She had never truly disconnected from the networks she had built during the war. For the first time in 10 years, she had to decide whether to come out of the shadows. The silence was coming. Humanity needed her. The entire galaxy might need her. She stood on a hillside in what had been her homeland, looking out at the sea. The fishing village where she had been born was gone, washed away by rising waters during the occupation. Nothing remained of her childhood except memories. She remembered her name. She still remembered it, though she had not spoken it in over 20 years. It sat in her mind like a stone at the bottom of a river, covered by years of war and pain and loss, but still there. She was tired. She had been fighting her entire adult life. Part of her wanted to disappear completely, to find some quiet place where no one knew her name, where she could finally rest. But she thought about her mother, who had taught children even when there was no hope. She thought about her father, who had fixed boats so people could feed their families. She thought about the girl she had been, the girl who had looked at the stars and dreamed of exploring them. That girl would not run away. That girl would face whatever was coming. Ghost turned away from the sea and began walking toward the capital city where the Collective ambassador waited. It was time to stop being a ghost. It was time to become something more. The Collective ambassador met Ghost in a chamber built specifically for the occasion. It was a room of glass and light, designed to allow the energy being to communicate comfortably. Government officials stood at the edges, watching with nervous eyes. They had never seen Ghost in person. Most of them had assumed she was dead or just a legend grown too large to be real. She walked into the chamber wearing simple clothes. Black pants, gray shirt, boots that had seen many miles of hard road. Her hair was cut short and, showing the first traces of gray. The scar across her face had faded over the years but was still visible, a line of lighter skin running from eyebrow to cheek. She did not look like a legend. She looked like a tired woman in her mid-30s. The ambassador's light shifted into patterns of greeting. "You are the one called Ghost," it said. "The one who defeated the Keth. The one who called the silence to your enemies." "I am," Ghost said. She did not waste words on unnecessary conversation. "We have studied what you did for many years," the ambassador said. "We have tried to understand how a species so young, so technologically primitive, could defeat the Keth when older civilizations could not. We have concluded that the answer is you." Ghost waited. She had learned patience in the war zones of the world. She had learned that powerful beings often talk too much. "The Keth made you," the ambassador continued. "They trained you, shaped you, gave you access to their deepest systems. Then, you turned all of that against them. You became their weapon pointed at their own hearts." "Yes," Ghost said. "We wish to understand how this was possible. The Keth training process has been used on thousands of species across millions of years. No one else has ever done what you did. Why?" Ghost thought about the question. She had asked herself the same thing many times over the years. Why had she succeeded when so many others had failed? What made her different? "The Keth made a mistake," she said finally. "They trained me to think like them. They gave me their language, their mathematics, their way of seeing the universe. But they forgot that I was still human underneath. They forgot that humans do not think like them." The ambassador's light shifted into patterns of curiosity. "Explain." "The Keth think in straight lines," Ghost said. "They see a problem and they find the most direct solution. They cannot imagine doing something that might hurt themselves in order to hurt their enemy more. They cannot understand sacrifice." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "When I called the silence to their homeworld, I knew it would also come for Earth eventually. I knew that by revealing our location, I was putting my own species in danger. A Keth would never do that. They would rather let their enemy escape than risk harm to themselves." "This is what makes humans different?" the ambassador asked. "This is what makes us dangerous," Ghost said. "We are willing to pay any price for victory. We will burn our own ships so we cannot retreat. We will destroy our own cities rather than let enemies hold them. We will die to protect people we have never met." The ambassador was silent for a long moment. Its light shifted through patterns that no human could interpret. "You are correct," it said finally. "The Keth feared you because they could not predict you. You did not behave like any species they had encountered. You broke their models, their expectations, their certainty." "Yes. This is why we have come," the ambassador said. "The silence has been advancing across the universe for billions of years. Every species that has faced it has tried to fight it or run from it. All have failed. We believe the answer might lie in doing something unexpected. Something that the silence cannot predict." "You think humans might be able to do what older species could not," Ghost said. "We think you might be able to," the ambassador said. "Not humans in general. You specifically. You have already done the impossible once. You may be able to do it again." Ghost stood in silence, processing what she was being told. The fate of the galaxy, possibly the universe, might depend on her. It was not the first time she had carried such weight. During the war, every decision she made had determined whether people lived or died. This was just the same thing on a larger scale. "What would you need from me?" she asked. "We need you to lead," the ambassador said. "Not just humanity, but the alliance we are building. Species from across the galaxy are coming together to face the silence. They need someone who can unite them, someone who can think in ways they cannot, someone who has already proven they can defeat the undefeatable. The government officials in the room shifted uncomfortably. They had not expected this. They had thought the ambassador wanted information or technology. They had not thought it wanted Ghost herself. Ghost looked at them. She could see the fear in their eyes. They were afraid of what might happen if she accepted. They were afraid of what might happen if she refused. "I will need authority," she said. "Real authority. Not symbolic leadership. If I am going to do this, I cannot have politicians second-guessing every decision I make." The ambassador's light pulsed with something like approval. "You will have what you need," it said. "The collective will support you. Other species will follow our lead. Humanity's governments will do as they must." The officials started to protest. Ghost silenced them with a look. "You asked me to save you once," she said. "I did. Now the universe is asking. Do you really want to get in my way?" They did not. Within a month, Ghost had assembled a new team. Some were veterans of the Liberation War, men and women who had served in the Wraith Corps and still remembered how to fight. Others were younger, humans born after the occupation who had grown up hearing stories of Ghost and dreaming of following her. The collective provided ships and technology beyond anything humanity had seen. They provided access to a network of allied species, each bringing their own knowledge and abilities. They provided intelligence on the silence, everything that was known about the enemy they faced. It was not much. The silence was old and strange. It moved through space like a living thing, consuming everything it touched. It did not communicate. It did not negotiate. It simply advanced, and everything in its path ceased to exist. Ghost studied all of this information. She absorbed it the way she had once absorbed Keth training, taking it into herself and making it part of her understanding. She began to see patterns that others had missed. "The silence is not alive," she said to her council one day. "Not in the way we understand life. It is more like a force of nature. An entropy wave. It breaks down complex systems into simple ones." "How does that help us?" asked one of her advisors, a human scientist who had spent years studying the fragments of information available. "Forces of nature can be redirected," Ghost said. "You cannot stop a hurricane, but you can steer it. You cannot stop an avalanche, but you can choose where it falls." "You want to redirect the silence?" The scientist sounded incredulous. "I want to understand it well enough to know if that is possible," Ghost said. "And, if it is not, I want to find something else. Some weakness. Some vulnerability. Something that no one else has thought of because they were too busy running away." She assembled expeditions into the regions of space that the silence had already consumed. These were dangerous missions. Many who went did not return. But those who did brought back data that had never been collected before. The silence left traces behind it. Not physical traces, but mathematical ones. Patterns in the void that spoke of what had been there before. Ghost studied these patterns for months, searching for meaning. She found it in the mathematics. The silence was not random. It followed rules. Its advance was predictable if you knew how to read the signs. It flowed along paths of least resistance, consuming what was easy to consume first, then moving on to harder targets. But there were places it avoided. Regions of space that it flowed around rather than through. Ghost mapped these regions and found something unexpected. The avoided regions all contained the same thing. Life. Specifically, life that was young and chaotic. Life that was constantly changing, evolving, producing unpredictable results. It avoids uncertainty, Ghost realized. It cannot process things that do not follow rules. This was the key. This was what no one else had understood. The silence was not invincible. It had a weakness. It could not handle chaos. Ghost began to build on this understanding. She designed weapons that generated random patterns of energy. She developed strategies based on unpredictability rather than order. She trained her forces to think in ways that the silence could not anticipate. The collective and its allied species watched with fascination. This was unlike any approach they had ever seen. They had always tried to fight the silence with organized force, with fleets and weapons and carefully planned attacks. Ghost was proposing something completely different. "You want to confuse it," the ambassador said. "I want to make it impossible for it to predict what we will do," Ghost corrected. "If it cannot predict us, it cannot counter us. If it cannot counter us, we have a chance." "This has never been tried," the ambassador said. "I know. You may fail. I might. But I would rather fail trying something new than succeed at running away." The ambassador's light shifted through complex patterns. When it spoke again, its voice carried something that might have been respect. "You are truly remarkable among your kind. Perhaps among all kinds." Ghost did not respond to the compliment. She had never cared about praise. She only cared about results. The preparations took years. Ghost traveled across the galaxy, visiting allied species, training their warriors in her methods, building the force that would face the silence. She was gone from Earth for long stretches at a time, but she never forgot her home. In quiet moments, she would look at Earth from orbit and remember the fishing village where she had been born. She would remember her mother's voice and her father's hands. She would remember her name. She was 45 years old when the silence reached the edge of the galaxy. The Allied fleet gathered at a point in space that Ghost had chosen after months of study. It was a place where the patterns suggested the silence would flow through. A place where they could make their stand. 12,000 ships from 50 different species. The largest fleet ever assembled in the history of the galaxy. All of them looking to Ghost for leadership. She stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the darkness ahead. The silence was invisible to normal sensors. You could only see where it had been, not where it was going. But Ghost had learned to read its patterns. She knew it was coming. "All ships," she said, her voice broadcast to every vessel in the fleet. "Remember your training. Do not fight in patterns. Do not follow predictable tactics. Trust your instincts. Trust the chaos inside you." The first tendrils of the silence emerged from the darkness. They looked like nothing. Literally nothing. An absence where there should have been stars. Ghost gave the order to attack. What followed was unlike any battle in the history of warfare. Ships moved in seemingly random patterns. They fired weapons in unpredictable bursts. They changed direction without warning, accelerated without reason, made choices that seemed to make no sense. It worked. The silence recoiled from the chaos. For the first time in billions of years, it encountered something it could not process. It tried to flow around the fleet, but the ships were everywhere, constantly moving, constantly changing. Ghost watched the patterns shift. She read the mathematics of the silence's movement. She saw something new in its behavior. "It is confused," she said. "Push harder." The fleet pressed its attack. More ships joined the chaos. More random patterns. More unpredictability. The silence began to fragment, its unified advance breaking into smaller streams that flowed in conflicting directions. Ghost ordered the fleet to exploit these breaks. Ships poured through the gaps, spreading their chaotic influence deeper into the silence's structure. The battle lasted for 3 days. Ships were lost. Thousands died. But, slowly, impossibly, the silence began to retreat. It pulled back from the chaotic assault, flowing away from the fleet into quieter regions of space. When it was over, Ghost stood on her bridge surrounded by exhausted officers and crew. They had done the impossible. They had turned back the silence. "It will return," one of her advisors said. "This is not the end." "No," Ghost agreed. "But now we know it can be stopped. Now we know how to fight it." The galaxy celebrated. For the first time in recorded history, the silence had been defeated in battle. The force that had consumed 1,000 civilizations had finally met something it could not overcome. Ghost received honors from every species in the Alliance. They built statues of her. They named planets after her. They wrote songs and stories and legends about the human woman who had saved the galaxy. She accepted none of it. "This is not finished," she said when they tried to crown her. "The silence will adapt. It will learn. We cannot rest. We cannot celebrate. We must prepare for the next battle." She was right. The silence returned 3 years later, changed by its first defeat. It had learned to anticipate some of their tactics. It had evolved. Ghost evolved faster. The second battle was harder than the first. More ships were lost. More people died. But Ghost adapted, found new ways to generate chaos, new unpredictable strategies. The silence retreated again. It came back. She pushed it back. It adapted. She adapted. The war became a constant cycle of attack and counterattack, evolution and counter-evolution. Ghost was 50 years old when she realized the truth. The war would never end. The silence would always return. But humanity, and the alliance they led, could keep pushing it back. Forever if necessary. "This is our purpose now," she told the Allied Council. "We are the chaos at the edge of the void. We are the unpredictable element that the silence cannot overcome. This is what we were meant to be." Some species accepted this. Others did not. The alliance fragmented over time, some choosing to flee rather than fight forever. But enough stayed. Enough believed in Ghost and her vision. By the time she was 60, Ghost had built a civilization dedicated to eternal war. Humanity led a core alliance of species that stood against the silence. They developed new technologies, new weapons, new strategies. They spread across the galaxy, establishing bastions of chaos that the silence could not consume. Ghost trained a new generation of leaders. She passed on everything she knew. She prepared humanity to continue the fight after she was gone. On her 70th birthday, Ghost returned to Earth for the first time in 15 years. She walked through streets that had been rebuilt after the Keth occupation. She saw children playing who had never known war on their own world. She saw a civilization that was thriving despite the darkness beyond. She made her way to the coast where her village had once stood. The sea still rolled against the shore, unchanged by all the wars and suffering. The stars still wheeled overhead, eternal and uncaring. Ghost sat on the beach and watched the waves. She was tired. She had been fighting for 60 years. Her body was failing, worn out by decades of war and sacrifice. The neural implants that connected her to technology were degrading, causing constant pain. She knew she did not have much time left. But she was not sad. She had done what she set out to do. She had saved her species. She had saved the galaxy. She had turned humanity from slaves into defenders of the universe. A young woman approached. She was one of Ghost's students, a brilliant tactician who would one day lead the Alliance herself. "The Council is asking for you," the young woman said. "There are reports of new silence activity in the outer sectors." Ghost did not rise immediately. She looked up at the stars. "Do you know my name?" she asked. The young woman was surprised by the question. Everyone knew Ghost. Everyone knew her call sign. But her actual name had been erased so long ago that no one remembered it. "No," the young woman admitted. Ghost smiled. It was a rare expression on her scarred face. "Good," she said. "Names are for people who have finished their work. I am not finished yet." She rose from the beach and walked toward the shuttle that would carry her back to the fleet. Behind her, the waves continued their eternal rhythm, washing against a shore that would remain standing because of everything she had done. Her name had been erased. But her call sign would live on forever. Ghost. The word meant hope. It meant sacrifice. It meant that somewhere in the vast darkness of the universe, there was someone watching. Someone fighting. Someone who would never give up. Centuries later, long after the woman who had first borne the call sign had passed into legend, humanity still remembered. On every world where humans lived, on every station and ship and colony, people told stories of ghosts. They told their children that when things were darkest, a figure might appear. A savior. A warrior. A ghost from the past come to defend them. The silence still came. It always came. But humanity was always there to meet it. Generation after generation of warriors took up the call sign, led the alliance, pushed back the darkness. Her name had been erased from every database, every record, every memory bank. No one remembered the girl from the fishing village. No one remembered the teacher's daughter who loved the sea. But the call sign lived on. In war zones across the galaxy. In battles that would be fought for 1,000,000 years. In the hearts of every human who refused to surrender. Ghost. Forever.